All right, well, we will go ahead and get rolling. I'm guessing we'll have a few more folks that will join here shortly, but we got a full content here tonight. Thank you all for being on. My name is Dwayne Brezak. I'm the Executive Director for NASW Michigan. I'm a macro licensed social worker. I got my MSW at U of M in policy and evaluation, and I've been with NASW since I finished my undergrad in 2012, just past the 10-year mark last year. Goes by quick. So I know you'll all be applying for your limited license soon. Soon you'll be coming back and be like, oh, it's my 10 or 20-year reunion shortly. Thanks for putting your graduation dates and which license type you'll be applying for in the chat. That's helpful. Lots of folks graduating in just a couple of months, and some folks who are going to be a little bit maybe a year or two from now. But the information that I give you all today will definitely at least apply for those of you who are graduating in the spring. As you may have been hearing, there are some proposed licensing changes happening in Michigan. There's a lot going on nationally in terms of the licensure landscape. This morning, the National Social Work Compact, if you're aware of that, it's really a set of legislation that is hoped to be adopted nationally that would allow reciprocity across states more easy. So especially for folks who live on a border, like in Michigan, a lot of our folks live in Ohio or Indiana or Wisconsin. How can we make that interstate practice a little bit easier for folks? That draft language just got dropped today nationally. So I've been on quite a few meetings around licensure in the last couple of months. But in terms of your all's focus here is getting to know what is the process right now, how do I get my limited license, and how do I get into this field post-graduation. So kind of the game plan for today is to be going through the licensure process. I'll weave a few NASW resources in there. So we'll start with the process of how to get from graduation to your limited license. And then after that, we'll talk a little bit specifically about the examination. I know there's some questions around that. And at that point, we'll kind of open things up for questions in between each one of those segments. So please hold any of your specific questions that you might have in there. I think we'll answer most of them along the way. So let me go ahead and do a screen share. I did drop some links into the chat for folks. I'll do that one more time here shortly, and then I'll do it at the end as well. That will have all the handouts that you all need for today. You shouldn't really need anything more specific. We are recording this, so if you'd like to review it later, it will be available on the NASW Michigan website, on our Facebook page and our YouTube channel. Okay, so let's just go into the licensure process a little bit. So kind of before we do that, I know a lot of you are thinking about what is life going to be like post-graduation and how does licensure fit into that. One of the things that I know that some of you might be thinking about is if you're planning to move out of state. Licensure isn't standard across the United States. Every state has a slightly different process. They're going to have slightly different rules and regulations. The letters might look a little bit different at the end of your credentials, depending on what state you move to. And so one of the things that's really important as we start this conversation today is knowing the resources in whatever state you're planning to move to. Now, today, I'm going to talk to you about Michigan licensure and what that process looks like. It's going to be generally similar if you move out of state, but there may be some tweaks that you want to get clarification of if you think you might be moving out anywhere outside of Michigan. If you are an NASW member, you get a dual membership into both the national chapter and into a state chapter. And so if you move, that state chapter will kind of follow you wherever you go across the country and provide you with kind of resources, networks, guidance in that particular state. So I highly recommend that if any of you are thinking of moving outside of Michigan or know you're going to be moving outside of Michigan after graduation, to connect with that NASW chapter in that state, and they can provide you with the best resources of licensure in that state. Some of the things that you're likely getting in your social work programs right now, for those of you who are students, that tend to end for many of you when graduation happens, is news and information about the field. There are a lot of things changing, like I mentioned, in the social work landscape right now, specifically around licensing, the examination, and how to practice across state boundaries. For you all who are going to be getting your licenses within the next couple of years, these changes will absolutely impact you in some way. So it's really important, especially as you exit your schools of social work, that you're connected to information about how the field is changing and how your specific license type might be folded in that mix of things. Now, we'll talk a little bit about some of those proposals later, and if you have specific questions, we can get those answered at the end. But some of that is also going to be involved in advocacy efforts. So the licensure process, any tweaks that we have to do here in Michigan have to go through our legislature, which if you know anything, and I'm sure in your policy classes about legislative advocacy, it is a lot of work. It is usually months to years long processes. And part of what we do as an organization is get folks elected to office. We have record numbers of social workers in office right now in Michigan, which is fabulous. We have 4 social workers in the Michigan House of Representatives, 2 in our Senate. So that provides us hopefully a nice window this year as we do some licensure revisions. And then in your practice, you may also need some ethics and legal guidance. This often comes early in a social worker's career too, as you're kind of building your professional identity. If you're having questions that are specifically related to ethics or legal guidance, we often offer consultation to our social workers across the state. And I know those of you who are members, you get emails from me all the time, lots of events and training and all that good stuff happening today. So as we get into the licensure process, first, I kind of want to set the stage to why do we even have this thing called licensure? Like, what does it mean? Why do I have to pay this money to the state? Why do we have regulation to begin with? And the simple answer of that is to protect our clients. Social work licensure and regulation exists so there is public accountability for us as a field. Just like the medical field, the nursing field, the counseling field, they all have similar sorts of regulations so that there is a free public way for members of our communities to potentially report us if we're doing something unethical or illegal in the field. Michigan was actually the very last state to get licensed. It wasn't until 2005 that our regulations took effect, and that passed in 2004. And so it gave us 3 things when we got that bill passed in 2004. It gave us an actual license, which means you can practice as a social worker. It gave us title protection, which means you can't call yourself a social worker unless you have a degree in social work and a license in social work. And it gave us a scope of practice, which means as a licensed professional, you can do this set of things. Just like you couldn't just be a doctor and practice medicine without a degree and passing their examination. Similar in social work, we have our own set of best practices. We have our own code of ethics. We have our own set of skills that define us as a profession. And before 2005, anybody in the state of Michigan could work as or be a social worker. They didn't even have to have a degree in social work to have a job title or work as a social worker. So at that point, it was really important, and it was almost 40 years of advocacy to get that passed here in Michigan. And so we've had licensure for about 20 years now in our state, but many states have had it since the 70s. And this has given us time to reflect and see what's worked, what hasn't worked, and why we're starting to move away or move towards some tweaks to our process in the next couple of years. As you think about applying, there's a couple of questions you want to ask yourself. For any of the BSW students who might be on the call today, the question you want to ask is, are you getting an MSW degree? And then if so, how quickly are you going to get an MSW degree? Because generally you don't need to have an LLBSW while you're in your MSW program. You're not going to need it generally for your internship. The only reason maybe to get it is if you are planning to work in a social work position outside of your internship, if you're working on top of that. Now, it takes a minimum of 2 years to get fully licensed. So that's the other kind of time consideration to think about if you are going to take some years off in between your bachelor's and your master's degree. If it's going to only be 6 months, a year, really take into consideration what are you doing in that time off. If it's going to be, if you're at least right now, you're thinking it's going to be at least 2 years and you're planning to work in the field and gather experience, yeah, absolutely get your limited license at the bachelor's level. Because you don't need to renew your limited license consecutively. So if something happens and you decide to go back to grad school, you can just let that bachelor's level license lapse at that point. Same thing at the master's level. Once you get your limited license, if something happens in your life and you're not working as a social worker, maybe you move, maybe you become a caregiver, maybe whatever happens, you can always take some time off and still bank those hours. The second question I already kind of mentioned, are you planning to stay in Michigan? So if you're not, you definitely need to research the licensure requirements in every state that you plan, or the states you plan to move to. Because some things may carry over if you start the process in Michigan, some states may not carry over the process. So if you're only going to be here for a couple of months and know you're going to be moving to, let's say, North Carolina, you may or may not want to start that process here in Michigan. Because at the very minimum, you'll be paying an application fee and getting fingerprinted here in Michigan, and you're going to have to redo that in whatever state you move to anyway. So those are kind of like the pre-questions to be thinking about as we get through this licensure process. But if you're graduating, you know you're going to start working immediately, then kind of everything else is going to fall into place as we go through today. Michigan has 3 levels of licensure: the associate's degree level, the bachelor's degree level, and the master's degree level. So for most of you, you're going to be either at the bachelor's or master's degree level. So that initial level of licensure is LLBSW or LLMSW, the limited license bachelor of social work or the limited license master of social work. The bachelor's level, we just have one option. So that's pretty easy if you're applying for that one. For the master's, you do have to designate whether you are a clinical or a macro licensed social worker. And that is not based off of what your track was in your MSW program. That is based off of what work you're doing after graduation. So I know clinical folks who ended up working in macro spaces immediately after graduation. I know macro students who ended up working in clinical spaces right after graduation. That's perfectly okay. You just need to make sure that your license type is matched up with what sort of supervised work that you're going to be doing after graduation. And you can end up getting both designations, but you have to start with one and finish that process with that license. And you should have the designation listed, like you see here. Should be LLMSW-clinical or LLMSW-macro. That lets an employer, it lets a client know what your particular licensing type and then scope of practice is. If you don't have that, it doesn't really tell anybody specifically what you're able to do with your degree and your license in the state of Michigan. So make sure you have that listed. And as soon as you get your limited license, make sure you put those letters right after your name on your cover letter, on your LinkedIn profile, on your signature line, everywhere that you can. I mean, you're paying for that degree and that license. Make sure that you're putting those letters everywhere that you can. And as you know, many social workers end up with somewhat of an alphabet soup after their name, depending on other sorts of credentials that you might need to get. If you want to be a school social worker, if you're working in addictions work, there's a lot of additional letters that you might end up getting depending on the sorts of social work positions you're applying for. The licensure process itself in Michigan, there are a couple of entities that you're going to want to be aware of through this process. The first entity is LARA. Licensing it, and that's licensing and regulatory affairs. They are the state of Michigan, and you're going to need to pay money to for the rest of your life as long as you want to have a Michigan social work license. So LARA is where you're going to apply for your limited license. It's where you're going to send your supervision and your transcripts. You're going to renew your licenses through LARA. If you want to file a complaint against a social worker, that all goes through LARA. So they are like your number one. You need to know them as it relates to your license. If your name changes for any reason, that is also done through LARA through your licensure portal. The second player that you need to know about and hopefully only have one interaction with is ASWB. That's the Association of Social Work Boards. ASWB are the folks who administer the social work exam. I'm not going to go down the exam rabbit hole yet tonight, but my hope is that you'll have to take the exam one time and one time only, and you'll only need to know ASWB for that one period when you get to that point of your licensure process. We at NASW, we do a lot of the advocacy work for social worker. We do exam prep courses. We do a lot of the professional development, supervision registry, all of that sort of stuff for the field. But we are not your licensure people. So in a year from now, don't call Dwayne up and say, I need to change my address on my license or my name change, because I won't have any way to do that. I can definitely get you connected to the right people. That will be through Laura. The other entities that you'll know about at some point is Pearson VUE. That's your actual testing site. So when you get to the point where you're actually going to be taking your social worker exam, you will schedule that at a Pearson VUE testing center. And that's where you'll choose your location, your time, wherever you end up actually wanting to take your exam when you get to that point of your process. And then lastly, CSWE. You all know about CSWE because I'm guessing that all of you are in CSWE accredited schools of social work, which means you are eligible to sit for licensure. If you are not sure if your school is accredited, you can go to the CSWE website, cswe.org, and you can search by the state. But Michigan is one of the largest states for social work across the country. We have the most bachelor's level students out of any state, and we're the third highest in terms of MSW students in the whole United States. So we got a lot of accredited schools of social work that range from cohorts of about 7 students in a class to about 450 to 500 students in a class. So we've got a really continual growth of our field here in Michigan. So as you get closer to graduation date, so this is specifically for folks who are graduating this spring, you're going to want to familiarize yourself with the MyPlus system. MyPlus is the Michigan Professional Licensing User System. So this is through LARA, Licensing and Regulatory Affairs. It's their online portal for licensing applications. This is about a year old. Prior to this online system, everything had to be sent in through mail. So it's really nice that it has moved to the 21st century and we're now doing things online. So what will this mean is you will apply for your limited license through this MyPlus system. You can track the status of your license right online. When you need to submit additional documents, that can be done all right online. When you get ready to renew your limited license and then your full license, that will be done all through this license system. And if there's ever a time you need to look up to see if a social worker is licensed, so maybe you're looking for an outside supervisor for your limited license and you want to verify that they have an active license, you can also do that through the MyPlus system. So it's a really pretty easy tool that I'll walk you through here in just a couple of minutes about how to actually set up your license itself. But really the first step towards getting to the licensure process is to know your graduation date. Now, I'm guessing for those of you who are graduating in the spring, you've either already applied for graduation or it's coming really soon. But for those of you who are graduating in April or May or sometime over the summer, probably about 3 to 4 weeks prior to graduation is when you're going to want to actually go on and create your MyPlus account. So now that we're 2-3 months out, it's good to go through the MyPlus system, watch the video recordings, but it won't make sense to actually start your account until you're a little bit closer to graduation. So what does that actually mean? So what you're going to do, and let me bring up the MyPlus page. So if you just Google LARA social work, that'll bring you the easiest way to find the social work information in Michigan. But that will bring up this page that I have here for you. Let me just zoom in a little bit so it's not quite so small. So it'll bring you to the general social work rules and regulations for the state of Michigan. And there's a good amount of stuff here that you can start reviewing and reading as you approach your graduation date. So some of the things that are going to be really important for you to read are, depending on which license type you're going to be applying for, the licensing guide. So there's the bachelor's and the master's level here. Those will give you kind of a walkthrough. It'll reiterate a lot of what I talked about today, but in Laura's language there, you can find your verification forms for supervision when you get ready to submit those processes. You can review continuing ed requirements once you get your full license and need to get continuing education. All of the information for your license will be housed on Lara. So if there are updates, you can find them through the Lara website. NASW, as a membership organization, we email all of our members all the time. So when there's changes, we want to make sure you're in the know about that. We also tend to put those on our social media. So if you're not following the chapter on social media, make sure to do that, because that's going to be a really easy way to get access to information. You can also read some frequently asked questions about the rules. And then I do recommend at least one time in your social work career to read through our actual law. It's not a fun read. It's one of those assignments that you just kind of have to get through, but it's really important because as you sign up and create your account through the MyPlus system, you are signing that you have read and understand all of the social work rules and regulations. It's not like when you get a new phone and you're just like, yep, I got my update, I'm good, right? You want to actually read through these once, because things do change occasionally, and you're more or less signing your professional identity that you will follow these rules for the rest of your career. So there's just a couple of things to review when you go onto this Lara page. But when you want to start looking at the actual application and seeing how the MyPlus system works, you're just going to click this apply and renew online button right in the middle. And that will bring you to the MyPlus system page. And so easy things to do as you get ready to think about creating your account is if you just scroll down, they will have a couple of really short videos on how to register for a MyPlus account. Watch through that video, and it's really intuitive how to get through this system. But if you've never had to do anything for the state of Michigan, there are a couple of details that they'll walk through these short videos for you. And then so once you've kind of walked through those videos, you'll click register your new account now. And so that's how you will then create your online account. You'll put in your name, you'll put what license you're applying for, your address, all your contact information. And once you do that, you will then have an account through the MyPlus system and can start the next steps of the process. Any questions kind of about the general MyPlus account and where to find that as you start this process? Okay, great. Feel free to use the chat or raise your hand feature as well. So before I get to step 2, while you're a student, there are 2 things that you're going to need to complete before you can actually get your limited license. And my hope is that most of your schools of social work are providing you with both of these things before graduation. So the first thing that you have to do is complete training in human trafficking. And so as you apply and create your account through MyPlus, there will be a couple of questions that you have to choose yes on. I have completed a human trafficking training requirement, and I have completed at least 2 hours of implicit bias training. These are mandated trainings for all health licenses in the state of Michigan. So these are things that if your school has not provided yet to you, you may want to ask somebody as you get towards graduation, because most of the schools in the state of Michigan do offer some sort of human trafficking and implicit bias to all of their students before graduation. If not, NASW also has some of these sorts of trainings available either on demand or at conferences or other sorts of online events that we do throughout the year. But you're going to have to check yes to both of these before your limited license application will go through. So be thinking about, if you don't already have these complete, about when you will get those complete. So as you apply for your limited license, good question, sorry, in the chat, Samantha, do you submit a certificate? No. So a lot of your license is based on being an ethical social worker. The state will not require that you submit certificates for those trainings. The only time you're going to have to show proof of training is if you get audited by the state of Michigan. So every year, about 10% of licensed social workers get audited, and they have to show their proof of continuing education. But for your limited license application, you're not going to have to show proof of that. But as a good future social worker, you should be following the rules that the state mandates going forward. And there are lots of implicit bias and human trafficking trainings out there. If anybody's thinking about coming to the NASW conference in Kalamazoo in May, it's also hybrid. There's going to be both of those options available at that event as well. Oh yeah, go ahead, Brandy. I see your hand.
Sorry, I had emailed you a couple times on this. So if our school doesn't offer it, so as long as it's on the NASW, then it would qualify for both or meet the guidelines for both of these?
Yeah, if we're putting on a human trafficking or an implicit bias event as a chapter, they will absolutely count towards your requirements. In the handout folder that I put earlier, the Google folder, you'll see that there is a specific flyer for the human trafficking training. So there are some specifics for both human trafficking and implicit bias about what content has to be included for the state to count it. So for human trafficking, for instance, it has to include content around understanding the types and venues of human trafficking, identifying victims of human trafficking in healthcare settings, identifying warning signs of human trafficking in healthcare settings, and resources for reporting the suspected victims of human trafficking. So each one has some specifics about it, but like how you have to get to those specifics is really vague. So human trafficking, for instance, you could read it in a journal. You could have went to a conference or a training. You could have watched a documentary. As long as those 4 pieces of content are included, the state considers that complete, at least for your limited license piece.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, and implicit bias works similarly. There's a couple of specific requirements. Trainings, I see Ashley's question. Some trainings are free, some have a cost to them. It really depends on where you find them. I know Wayne State and U of M both have like online ones that anybody can take for a small fee, I believe. You know, a lot of the ones we just did a webinar in a couple of weeks ago, and ours was free for members. So it really depends on the location and the person who's putting it on. Abby, question about if these courses if you completed a training in a different state, could it count? Absolutely, if it covers those same content pieces. It doesn't have to necessarily be Michigan specific human trafficking, as long as it covers those 4 specific item types in there. Good question. Oh, good question. So Rose's question. Is there a time frame for those? Do you need to complete them within an X number of months? So for both implicit bias and human trafficking, you have to have completed them within, I believe, 2 years prior to your license. So you have a pretty good range of when you could have taken them. Because I do know that if some schools, it's part of a curriculum, so likely it was maybe a semester or even a year before, that should still count. And Elizabeth, yes, if you've presented on human trafficking, as long as it covers those 4 item types, you can absolutely use that. Good questions on that. So once you've kind of got through your human trafficking and your implicit bias training, and you're approaching that graduation date, you're going to go to that MyPlus login. You're going to create an account. And what that's going to do is you will get a confirmation from them that says, okay, you've got an account created. You're now eligible to go get your fingerprints taken and have your transcripts sent to Laura. If you've been fingerprinted for a job recently, you still have to get re-fingerprinted. The only folks who are sometimes exempt from that is if you already have a health license and have been fingerprinted specifically for Laura. So generally, most people have to get fingerprinted for this process, which is going to cost roughly $75. Your initial application for licensure as of today is $43.20. It's a really random number. Every couple of years, they like raise it like 5% or something like that. But as of today, it's $43.20. And so you'll create your account, you'll get your email confirmation. They'll give you a link to where you can find fingerprinting locations. When you choose your fingerprinting location and get that appointment done, that fingerprinting site sends your fingerprints right to the state. You don't have to worry about that. And then your university or your school of social work will need to send your final transcripts to Laura. So sometimes that can be the piece that holds up somebody from getting their limited license. Because usually it takes schools a couple of weeks after graduation to actually get final transcripts complete. And so if you've gotten your account set up a couple of weeks before graduation, you can submit usually through your registrar's office at your School of Social Work. It's where most of the transcripts are held. And I would say about 50% of the schools of social work, it's free to ask for a copy of the transcripts. So this is something that may vary a little bit depending on what school of social work you go to. I think the most I've heard that you would have to pay for a copy of your transcripts is like $10 or $15, but that would be something to check with your specific school about if there is a charge for that. Because definitely one of the things that I want you all to leave here tonight with is a sense of the cost and the timeline for this process, because it's not free, but we're going to talk about some strategies to get some of this paid for whenever possible. And so things like transcripts, hopefully your school will cover that cost, but it may take sometimes 3 to 4 weeks after graduation for final transcripts to actually be posted and available. And so you might be waiting on your limited license a little bit longer than you would want just for that reason. If that's the case, what I recommend doing, especially if you're going to be applying for jobs pretty soon, is you can just be upfront about that in a cover letter or an email to an organization as you're applying and say, I'm graduating from, Madonna University or Spring Arbor University, and I'm graduating in May. I have applied for my limited license. I'm waiting on my school to finish and submit my final transcripts. By the time I'm hired into this position, I should have my limited license. And that just gives an organization the hopefully the support and the confidence to know that, okay, I can interview this person. It's okay. They're fully aware of their process, and we can at least get them into the interview seat, because there are some jobs, especially on the clinical side at the MSW level, that will not hire you until you have the letters after your name, because if it involves billing, you can't bill generally as a limited licensed social worker, and it's a liability risk if you're not licensed. And so for some positions, especially if you don't hear back from a position you think you're really qualified for, you might want to reapply if you didn't get any sort of message while you didn't have those letters after your name, if the job is still open. If you really only need to have transcripts sent for the license you're applying for. So if you have a BSW but are applying for your master's license, just have your master's license or your master's credentials set. And they don't care at all about GPA. It's all really just making sure you have the degree from the school. So that is kind of your first step. It's going to be submitting an application through MyPlus, getting your fingerprints taken, and having your transcript sent. That is really what you're going to do as you approach graduation, is those 3 things. And that's going to cost you roughly $115, give or take a little bit of wiggle room depending on how the transcripts land. So the application, again, is $43.20, and the fingerprints are $75. Depending on your site, it might be a little bit lower than that. But that's really, I think, the important thing to know as you get through this step here. As I think about the time of year this will be for many of you as you approach graduation, there are a couple of strategies, I think, for this part of the process, but how you might be able to think about getting it paid for, not by you. That is Dwayne's goal for today, is get most of this paid for or all of this paid for, not out of your pocket. So the first couple of ways that you may be able to do this is your internship hiring you? Some of you are probably starting to have those conversations. Some of you probably are like, no, thanks, don't want to work there. That's okay too. That's what the internship process is about. But if your internship has been great and they are thinking about bringing you on, you should start asking those questions now. How do you support your limited license staff who are coming in? Do you reimburse the licensure process? Do you offer supervision to staff on site, or do you reimburse the licensure process? Because that's a really good way. You've already built the rapport. You've showed them your work ethic. They have an interest in hiring you. So clearly they want to invest just like you probably have invested, most of you, with an unpaid internship, which we're also working on a lot of stuff. So be on the lookout. We've got some good stuff, hopefully in this year's budget at the state level around paid internships. But while we're working towards that, many of you are in unpaid or low paid settings for your internship. For this particular part of the process, $115 is likely not going to be a deal breaker for an organization. $115 for a new social worker getting ready to graduate might be a lot of money. So, this is always a good thing to ask about, especially if your internship is going to hire you. These are also good questions to be thinking about as you go through the interview process, especially when you get to that phase where they're going to ask you about salary negotiation. Right, you want to have your whole checklist of things on your list. So obviously the salary amount is a key piece of that, but do you reimburse the licensure process, or do you provide a professional development budget for your staff? Because for those first couple of years while you're going through the licensure process, you may not need to get an additional credential. So a professional development budget, let's just say it's $500 for a year, that would pay for this process plus some more. And sometimes you can pay for membership fees in organizations like NASW or MASSW or whatever other social work organizations you might be interested in may pay for you to go to additional trainings, even though as a limited licensed person, you don't need to go to conferences or continuing ed events. But oftentimes you do want to, because you want to expand your skill set. You want to make sure you're practicing at the best level possible. And so if you can negotiate a professional development budget early on as you start a position, that's going to be really helpful as you go throughout your career. And then the third possible option, and I know this one's going to be more privileged conversation for folks in the field, but as you think about some of you will be having graduation parties. I know when I graduated, I was a first-gen college student, and I had some of my family say, "Hey, we're so proud of you, congratulations on your MSW, we'd like to get you something, what would you like?" And your brain's like, money, cash, right? And so there are strategic ways to think about that. Yes, you want money because that's helpful as you start your social work career. But I always say there's lots of ways to rephrase this that are going to maybe get the things you need paid for. Aunt Sandy, will you sponsor my licensure paperwork? It's this much money. Will you sponsor my membership or it for a year, right? Will you pay for my exam? You sponsor is a really good word that seems to ring for a lot of people. Will you sponsor my exam fee? Because again, $115 for a new person entering the field can sometimes be a lot of money. And you may have somebody else in your life who's willing to support you as you start your journey in the field. So those are just a couple of things that you may want to think about that might be options as you start your social work career. I already kind of went through the training requirements that you're going to have to think about as you go through the licensure process. But just again, you need to have completed a human trafficking training and at least 2 hours of implicit bias. So the implicit bias has specific time requirements. The human trafficking does not. So that's the only difference really between those two in terms of, and you can see with the implicit bias, that one actually has 5 years. You can take anything within 5 years leading up to your license. So you probably want something fresher than 5 years, but the state will allow anything within 5 years. Okay, so once you have had your transcript submitted, your fingerprints are done, your application's done, then you will get your limited license. And once you've asked your school to submit your transcripts and you've had your fingerprints taken, I would check your online account through the MyPlus system every day. Because what you will see is as soon as your transcripts and everything has been finalized, you will get your limited license approval on your account online. It will take a few weeks for you to likely get your actual license in the mail, but as soon as it's active on the MyPlus account, means you have a limited license. So that is when you can change your credentials. That's when you can add it on your resume and cover letter. As you can change it on your signature line. As soon as you see that limited license is active, change it everywhere, put it on all your stuff. Your limited license will be on a 1-year renewal period. So every year that you need to renew your limited license, it will be $27. And you can renew your limited license up to 6 times. That's the rule as of right now. So like I mentioned earlier, you don't have to renew your license consecutively. So if something happens in your life and you're not working in social work anymore for a period, you can always just let that license lapse and then renew it when you start working again. Because you don't want to use your time up while you're not working. Because you do, as of 2023, there is a cap of 6 renewals of your limited license. And if you've gone all 6 of those renewals without passing the exam, finishing your hours, or finishing your supervision, you cannot get licensed in Michigan at that level any longer. You'd have to move to a different state and start their process and then maybe get reciprocity here. That's the only workaround right now for that particular system. Now, I will say we're working on that one too legislatively to try to get that tweaked, but as of right now, do not renew your limited license if you are not working in the field for whatever reason. To go from a limited license to a full license requires 3 things. And those are the bullets that are on this slide: working, under supervision, and passing the exam. So when you're hearing folks that are overcomplicating this process, it's 3 steps to go from your limited to a full license: working while you're under supervision and passing the exam. Those are the 3 things that you need to do to go from a limited to a full license. Now, 4,000 seems like a large number. What that really means is 2 years if you're working full time. So you can count 2,040 hours in a calendar year towards your licensure hours, which is roughly 40 hours a week for that period. You can absolutely work more than 40 hours and get paid for more than 40 hours, but your licensing period, you can only count the 40 hours per week. You can be working less than that. The state, by the state's requirements, is you have to work between 16 and 40 hours for that to count. So you want to make sure, again, that you're at least at that 16-hour a week minimum for it to count towards your license. And I'll give an example of where this came up. We had a social worker who stopped working temporarily because they had a kid. Then they slowly got back into the field and they were working 12 hours a week for like 6 months. 12 hours is not 16 hours, which is what the state minimum is. So none of those hours for that time period counted towards their licensure renewal. And so that's something that you want to make sure you're at least hitting that 16. And if you can't or you aren't, you'll likely not want to renew that limited license for that period of time. And your work can be either paid or volunteer, as long as it falls within a social work sort of job description. And social workers, as you all know, we do pretty much everything. So there's a case to be made for almost every job to have some sort of social work scope of practice in it. And if you find yourself working in a more non-traditional job, which a lot of social workers do, or you're the only social worker working somewhere and you're not sure if it would count towards your hours, you can call up Laura and they have a scope of practice person you can talk with, and they can verify, yes, you can tell them this is my job description, this is my title, would this count for my license? They can verify that, yes or no. And I see a couple of other questions about the human trafficking and implicit bias. I'll get to those a little bit later. So you definitely want to make sure that you're just aware of what your work experience is while you're going through this process. You're not going to have to submit documentation of all of your hours when you apply for your full license. All you're going to need to submit is what's called a supervision verification form. And that's a form, just like 2 pages, that your supervisor or supervisors, because you might have more than one during your couple of years that you're going through your limited license, that they fill out that says, I worked with this limited licensee from this date to this date for this many hours. And as long as those hours add up to 4,000, you're good to go. And so, as we talked about what you should be asking during the interview process, one of those really important questions is there a supervisor that's provided on site? And if not, do you reimburse that cost? Because supervision is a critical part of this whole process. And when you think about social work licensing supervision, you really shouldn't think about it as somebody who's just going to check off on your paperwork. This is supposed to be a professional mentor, somebody who's going to guide you through ethical dilemmas, to talk to you about advocacy opportunities, to get you connected to relevant training that you may need as a new professional. That's going to connect you to other social workers and professionals that will help build your kind of toolkit as you start your professional career. Not just that person to sign off on hours. And that's not what you want as a new professional either. You want somebody who's really going to be in that more mentorship role for you. And so some organizations, they're great. They'll have that person or multiple social workers on site who will provide that for you, no problem. You could probably go to your internships, for those of you in field, and ask those organizations, how do they support their limited licensees? Do they have supervisors that are on site? And if not, how do they make sure that their supervisors get, or their supervisees get the hours that are necessary? And some examples of that is you may end up being at a place that doesn't have another social worker. And so you may be forced to contract somebody out on your own. And that can range from free, if you have a social worker who's willing to provide supervision for free, should not be a family member or friend. That's dual relationship issues. But if you know somebody who can do it for free, or it ranges in terms of what people will charge in the field. I'd say the average for an hour of supervision is somewhere normally between $40 and $50 an hour from what we see. But it can range as high as a clinical billable hour, which can range more than $100 an hour. So you really want to be very cautious about if supervision is included or not before you accept a position, and if they reimburse it. Because if not, if you're paying $50 an hour and for 4,000 hours of work, that's going to be roughly 100 hours of supervision. So 52 weeks in a year, you'll have to do an hour per week that you're in supervision for 2 years, 104 hours of supervision. So at $50 an hour, that's $5,000 over 2 years. I don't want any of you to have to pay $5,000 over 2 years out of your own pocket, $200 a month. And that's, the average end. There are higher clinical supervisors and macro supervisors out there as well. And so some of that also goes into your negotiation. So if the agency pays for it, the agency might have a higher reimbursement rate for that supervisor than you would be able to pay out of your own pocket. NASW, we offer a supervision registry on our website. So if you do need to find somebody, we have folks who have been through our certificate program that we list by county. There's also some other licensing and supervision resources, like a sample contract if you end up having to contract with somebody, some weekly logs that you can use, some talking points, some standards of supervision. All those sorts of documents are available on the NASW Michigan site for folks. So for keeping track of your hours, going off of Kelly's question in the chat, you should absolutely be having more documentation than the state is going to require. So again, the state is only going to require that you submit a verification, or your supervisor submit a verification form. However, you as the limited licensee should at least have a monthly log that your supervisor is signing off on, that you're signing off on, that verifies when you met and for how long. So at the minimum, you have backup documentation should anything happen, because things do happen, like people get fired, people die. And if you don't have any of that documentation, that relationship didn't exist in the eyes of the state. And so you want to make sure that you have backup documentation. We have some sample logs also on our website, but you can create a Google Doc. You can use whatever works best for you and your supervisor as you track through that. If you are working volunteer capacity and not being paid, because if you're paid, you're likely to have a paycheck stub should you need some documentation to the state for whatever reason in an emergency situation. You're not going to likely have that for a volunteer position. So what I recommend is if you are volunteering as part of your social work experience, that at least, again, on a monthly basis, you're getting some sort of documentation from an agency director or somebody else who's oversees the organization that can sign off to say that you worked or volunteered there for that amount of hours. Dwayne's position and NASW's position is you should have a contract with your supervisor, whether your employer offers it or not. Because things happen at an agency just as much as they happen if you're contracting somebody who doesn't work at an organization. Lots of times people leave positions Sometimes there's bad blood at organizations. Sometimes people get fired and they're no longer able to connect with the organization anymore. And so you want to make sure that you have that contract written, even if it's through your employer. And that should at least outline a couple of basic things: how often you're meeting, what the pay arrangement is, and it might be free. So that's, you just want to let that notified. And I usually say contract should be at a 6-month renewal period. So you can check back in, you can make any alterations that need to happen. And because things do change pretty rapidly in a social worker's career. Your supervisor does need to be an LMSW. So if you're at the bachelor's level limited license, your supervisor still has to have an LMSW. If you're a limited license master social worker, your supervisor has to have an LMSW and also the designation you're going for. So if you're going for the macro license, they have to be macro licensed. If you're going for the clinical license, they have to have the clinical license. So that's something that you also want to make sure to check. Your supervisor will know that, but if you want to double check just to make sure, you can go to that MyPlus account and look up their license type, and it will tell you what types of licensing that they have. You can absolutely have multiple supervisors. So if you've got somebody who's if you're doing an hour of supervision per week, that's going to be roughly 4 hours a month. Maybe you're doing somebody who's doing individual supervision for 2 hours of that, and somebody who's doing group supervision for 2 hours of that. That's perfectly acceptable. You just want to make sure, again, you have documentation of all of that. You're allowed to earn up to 50% of your supervision through group format. So you can't do all of it in group settings, but you can do at least 50% of it in a group setting. And I highly recommend group supervision, regardless of where you end up working, because it's going to, again, get you connected to other social workers. Some of them you might work directly with, some of them that you may not work directly with. And many of our social work positions are actually strangely isolating. You may be the only social worker. You might be with a whole bunch of social workers in theory at an organization, but you may not actually interact with folks very often. And so group supervision can be a really good time to just network and connect with folks and pop ideas off of each other. So let me just see, there's one more question from Kelly around this. Resubmitting, can the required hours be split across 2 simultaneous part-time positions? If so, yeah, so it can be 1,000 positions as long as you're at least hitting 16 hours a week. You probably want to have not more than 2 supervisors at a time. That's a lot of people. And since supervision has to be an hour in length, likely you'll only have 1 or 2 that you'll do at a time. But yeah, you can have multiple supervisors. And yes, Ashley, you can absolutely have somebody on site, and you could have somebody off site. For instance, I work at NASW, but I supervise social workers who do not work at NASW, and I supervise social workers who work at the state of Michigan who have no macro licensed social workers in their departments. And so they reached out to me needing some additional supervision. And so you don't have to have somebody who works on your site, but your supervisor should have skills within the sort of position you work in, because you want, again, somebody who knows the sort of job you're working in, and can guide you if there are things that come up in that sort of role. So yeah, so please make sure that your supervisor understands your scope of practice. And you'll know this is somebody you're going to likely have a relationship with like 2 years minimum if you're at the same job or working with the same person. So you want it to be somebody you'd like, right? And sometimes that's the reason to switch to a different supervisor, because the personalities might not gel. Maybe their supervision style isn't exactly what you need. Just like when you find a therapist, sometimes you got to shop around a little bit to find the right person. And that sometimes can get tricky because maybe there's only one option that's available to you for free at your organization. And maybe you just have to stick with that out while you finish up your hours. But if you have the opportunity, I highly recommend making sure it's somebody who you actually want to talk to for at least an hour every week and you feel comfortable with sharing. And there are benefits to not having it be somebody who's not at your site, because that person doesn't have any conflict of interest. That person isn't your boss. So sometimes your supervisor is your boss, and you may be less comfortable telling them honestly about issues you're having in your workplace if it is somebody who is like a more superior role to you. Supervision can happen in person, can happen virtually, as long as it's live, you can absolutely do supervision. Most, I think most folks, especially if you're contracting somebody, likely either over phone or Zoom at this point. So supervision, though, is a very important part of this process, and I see as almost the most critical aspect of all of this licensure piece, because that person really is going to be a mentor for you through those couple of years out of school. Samantha, I see your hand.
Yeah, I'm going to try and see if I can phrase my question correctly. So if I have somebody that is willing to supervise me from an outside agency, if they have never done state supervision before for licensing, is there something that they have to submit, or am I just verifying obviously they have the license and credentials?
So good question. So to be a supervisor in Michigan right now, all you have to be is fully licensed. You don't, those people don't have to have gone through any training. They should have, just like you all. You want to make sure you have expertise in what you're doing. So that's often a good question for supervisors too, if you get to kind of pick and choose, like what sort of training do you have? What sort of experience with supervision do you have? What's your model for supervision? There's a lot of different ways people view supervision and mentoring. And then when you are ready to complete your hours, they will fill out the verification form.
Okay.
And that verifies that they supervise you for X amount of time. Now you can have a supervisor. So say you leave a job after a year, when that relationship ends or is terminated, you can have that supervisor complete the verification form then and send it to the state. And so then it's kind of just banked there for when you finish the rest of your hours. A supervisor does have to have an active license. Yes, absolutely. And they need to be Michigan based. So you couldn't have a supervisor who's out of state. Good questions. Okay. So again, just repeating this process in a nutshell. So to go from a limited license to a full license, and thank you all for sticking with me. I know this is a lot of information. You're going to complete your work while you're being supervised, and you're then going to be made eligible to sit for your exam. So when you complete your 4,000 hours and have your verification forms turned in, that's when your account through MyPlus will be switched to basically allow you to register for your test. Not so in Michigan, well, everywhere right now, you cannot sit for your exam before your hours are complete. You can start studying whenever you want, but you're not going to be able to actually register or pay for your exam until those 4,000 hours are done. When your hours are done, what that will look like is you will go to the ASWB website, which is just aswb.org, and you will pay. It's $230 for the bachelor's level exam, $260 for the master's level exam. And then once you pay through ASWB, you'll get a link to that Pearson VUE testing center where you'll choose your specific testing location and time. So they have testing times morning, noon, night, weekdays, weekends. So whatever fits your schedule best when you do that. If your account, so Kelly, good question. Does it automatically switch? Should it? Yes. Does it always? No. So if you have submitted everything and you go to pay for your exam and it says you're not eligible to pay for your exam, all you need to do is call Laura, and usually over the phone they can switch it on their end, and then it should allow you to pay. But that does happen. I'd say 1 in every 10 people have to call and get that process through. But the MyPlus system is only a year old, so I don't know. Hopefully that will get resolved as this new system is in play. Good question. So this kind of affirms what we just talked about. When you're applying for your full license, and there's another application fee for your full license at $43.20, and then your supervision verification forms will be submitted as well. What I would recommend for all of you is making sure that your supervisor, when they fill out that verification form, that they also give you a copy of it, because there have been plenty of times that I have heard of that social workers are like, my supervisor said they sent their documentation to the state and the state says that they never received it, and now I can't get a hold of my supervisor. Don't let that be you. Make sure that you are also getting a copy, so if anything happens, you at least have a backup at your disposal. All right, before we move kind of on, I just want to read through some of the questions for the 4,000 hours. Are we also counting our current field hours? No internship hours count at all towards your license. Only once you get your limited license do hours start counting. Your supervisor does not have to have their initial license in Michigan, but they do have to have a current active Michigan license in order for it to be a supervision here. All right, other questions about supervision or kind of this process from a limited to a full license? A lot of good questions tonight. Appreciate all y'all thoughtfulness. All right. Okay, so then if you want to obtain at the master's level the second designation, you can. So if you went for clinical first and then want to get the macro or vice versa, it's half of the requirement. So 2,000 hours of work under supervision and then the second exam. If you want to get the second designation, you do need to contact Laura and they just have to make a note of that on your account. But it's not a significantly harder process. For most social workers, you're already doing at least some sort of meso work. All clinical social workers have some overlap with macro, and most macro social workers have some overlap with clinical, that it wouldn't be tremendously hard. In 2005, when Michigan passed licensing, anybody who is registered as a social worker at that time got grandparented in. So what that means is they have both the clinical and the macro license already. So there's a lot of folks who already have both designations. So for supervision purposes, it's not usually insanely hard to find somebody who does that, especially if you have some seasoned professionals at the place you're working for. All right, so that is if you want the second designation. Once you get that full license, that's when your continuing education requirements will start. So while you're in that limited license phase, you don't have to earn continuing education. And if you do take continuing education, which may be great, might give you some supplemental knowledge, you can't carry that in over to once you are fully licensed. Your full license, instead of being on a 1-year renewal, will be on a 3-year renewal. And actually, I'm going to remove this part of the slide because this is not true anymore. They just changed this last year. So everyone, your actual license, when you finish your limited license hours, will start at that point. So in the past, every social work license started May 1st of 1 year and went until April 30th. That's no longer the case. Your license will be from the date you finish it. And get it. So your renewal will be different from everyone else likely on this call, depending on when you finish up your hours. So once you get that full license, you're in a 3-year renewal cycle. And that's when you need to earn your 45 hours of continuing education. And there are some specifics in that. 5 of those have to be ethics content. 2 of them have to be pain management related. And 2 of them have to be human trafficking related. So of the 45 CE required hours, you have 36 that have designated purposes to them. The rest, 36 don't have designated purposes of them. 9 have specifics, the 5 ethics, 2 pain management, and 2 human trafficking. Additionally, you have to get 3 hours of implicit bias training. So that's somewhat different than the words continuing education. Could you get continuing education that is implicit bias? Yes, but it does not have to be approved for continuing education purposes for you to count it toward that implicit bias training. So that is some very weird. We haven't had language like that passed by the state, and probably in the next couple of years it will be tweaked so it fits better with everything. But just know right now, your implicit bias does not have to be continuing education purposes. Continuing education, great question, Ashley. There are a million places for you to get continuing education, and you should not be paying for most of your continuing education. So this is a good question while you're applying for jobs too. Does the organization provide continuing education opportunities or pay for professional development for their staff? So like we mentioned earlier, if you've negotiated in a professional development budget, Once you're past the licensure process, that budget will then transfer into going to conferences, paying for webinars, whatever you might need for your licensure renewal. NASW, you can get all of your CEs for free if you're a member of NASW. 100%. We have free stuff all the time. There are also paid opportunities if you want some of those as well, but you could find all of your continuing education for free through that. Most schools of social work, at least the larger schools, have continuing education programs. Many of the larger organizations like the community mental health, the hospitals, they often have in-service continuing education for their staff. Some positions at the state of Michigan will have opportunities, whether you're working in child welfare or in foster care. Oftentimes there are continuing education that there is available for those folks. All of your continuing education can be held virtually. There is 50% has to be live content. So a live webinar would count for that, but could also be a conference or an in-person function. The other 50%, so 22.5, could be done through what's called asynchronous learning. So you watch a pre-recorded webinar, you read a journal. There's journals that can be specifically used for continuing education. We have a virtual book club, so you can earn 3 CEs per book you read through that. So there's a few alternative methods if you don't go to a live content format. You can do all of these things while you have a limited license or while you're a student. You know, you don't need continuing education as a student, but it's great to build your network up as much as possible. And CE events are a really good way to start to know people who are in your specific areas of social work. But none of those will count towards your license until you get that full license there. Okay, so before we move, take a little breather before the examination. Let me just go through the price of this, because I think that this is important, because there can be very different tracks that people fall into. And my hope is you'll fall into the happy face side. So on the lowest way for this process to look in terms of financial obligations, you'll have to pay for an initial application fee, $43.20. You'll have to get fingerprinted, $75 right, roughly. You'll have to renew your limited license at least 1 year, because it takes 2 years to complete the hours. So that's $27 for at least the one-time renewal. You'll have to take your exam one time, 230 or 260, and you'll have to apply for your final license, $43.20. So that's going to be around $450 over at least 2 years period. So not terrible at the scheme of things. And hopefully you've at least negotiated some of this into your initial contracts for your job. But this assumes a couple of things: that supervision is provided, that you aren't taking exam prep, that you only have needed to take the exam one time, which is my hope for all of you as well. So then if we kind of go over to the sad face, you can see where the big differences start to lie. So the renewal fee could be upwards of $150 if you renewed all 6 times versus 27. If you take the exam multiple times, as of right now, that is $260 times however many times you need to take it. On average, it takes people 1.3 times to take it generally, but there's a large variation in that, and you probably have heard about some of what the licensure changes are. We'll talk about licensure prep too once we get into the examination. There are prep courses you can take. I'd say on average, you're probably going to be paying somewhere between $200 and $300 for exam prep, should you be looking to take an actual course. There are some cheaper options, and we'll talk about that when we get into the exam. And then you see this big number next to supervision. That is, in my view, the wild card through this process. Because if you have to pay for supervision out of pocket, again, you might find somebody who do it for free. But if you're looking at the average of $50 an hour, that's going to be that $5,000 range over 2 years. If you're paying somebody more of a billable hour, that can be over $10,000 over 2 years. And so that, as a limited license person, if you're paying out of your own pocket, I don't think you should ever pay that much money for supervision. Unless, if you found a job that you can pay $400 a month extra for supervision, tell me. Maybe I'll look for that job, because that's an insane amount of money. Now, if your organization is reimbursing you or paying the supervisee or the supervisor for their services, absolutely give that social worker billable hour. That's different than if you're paying out of your own pocket as a new social worker. Because a social worker who, especially on the clinical side, who's getting reimbursed for an hour of clinical services, they're making $100 an hour, $180 an hour. Some insurances make even more than that. So yes, that isn't what their time is generally worth if they're using an hour of time up. So if your organization is reimbursing that, absolutely shoot for the high number, because if they have other medical professionals on their staff and those folks are getting supervised, you can bet a doctor who is getting supervision, that person is getting paid more than $100 an hour to offer supervision. And so part of it is we need to raise the equity game in social work, which we're working on a lot of issues around that at the state level as well. But the supervision piece, you absolutely need to know if supervision is included before you accept a position. Because you don't want to start a job, you think it's your dream job, and then you realize you've got to be paying $200 a month out of your pocket for supervision. If they reimburse it, could be great. And so thinking about what you should be looking for in a job, yes, it's the salary number. Yes, it's this piece. It's the whole package you want to know about. What is the culture of the organization? And am I going to be a good fit? Do you need to be working remotely from part of the time? What are the benefits of this organization? You know, some organizations will reimburse your cell phone costs. They'll give you technology. Some organizations will let you work completely from home. How much student loan debt do you have? Nobody, I don't want to talk about that still after 10 years of graduation, but that's important to be thinking about as you're applying for jobs. Do you need to be working in a place that qualifies for loan forgiveness? Until we can get national loans forgiven, that's a consideration we have to be thinking about as social workers. Does my organization qualify for loan forgiveness programs? And so those are good things to all be adding to your checklist as you get through the interview process. Because hopefully some of it is already brought up by the hiring managers because they know what social workers should be looking for as they're applying for jobs. But if you end up working, especially in a non-traditional role, your employer is not going to know these sort of costs for the licensure process. They may not know if they qualify for loan forgiveness. And so that may require you doing a little bit more of your own self-advocacy. And especially for the folks who might be going the macro route, likely you're going to be the only macro social worker at your job, and maybe the first social worker that's hired into that sort of role. And we have to sometimes do a little bit more self-advocacy for that. Okay, so let me, before we move into the examination, other questions, we got about 15 minutes left, so I want to make sure we have a little bit of time to just go through the examination itself. Any questions about the process of the licensure process for either the bachelor's and the master's level? Yeah, Samantha.
Just quick question with the supervisor piece again. When you're like meeting with the supervisor, do those hours count towards your working hours or no?
Oh, yeah.
They do? Okay.
The only thing that if you are contracting somebody that's not at your work to do your supervision, that somewhat will depend on your work arrangement. Does your boss let you take that hour a week that you're doing outside as a work hour? But they should.
Okay. That's good to know.
And when you think about your social work experience and what qualifies for work, it's especially for folks who are getting a clinical license, it's not just time you spend with clients. It's paperwork, it's training, it's everything part of your social work job, not just your time with clients. And that sometimes there is confusion out there. Anything that's tied to your social work job is social work experience. Advocacy work you're doing, coalitions you might be a part of. It's all part of what we do as social workers. So it's not just narrowly the time you're spending with your individual clients. Alyssa, your question about case management fall under clinical guidelines. It will depend on what the job is. So that's likely one that you're going to want to call Laura about should that be. Most case management jobs fall under bachelor's level scope of practice. So that's especially if you've been in a role for a while and maybe are getting a master's degree. The expectation with your license is that your scope of practice and your job duties would change with your license type. There are some case management positions that are more master's focused, but generally those fall under a bachelor's level scope of practice. Amy, I see your hand up.
Yes, I'm renewing my LBSW in March, and then I'm going to be applying for my LMSW in May. So what does that look like? Do I keep them both then?
So what'll happen is, so unfortunately, you're just in a weird time gap where you'll have like a month of overlap. But likely what that will mean is next year, when your LLBSW is up for your renewal, you'll just let it lapse. And so then you'll just move into your LMSW hours, because your hours don't count, like your bachelor's level hours won't carry over into your master's level bucket. And so you just need that bachelor's level license, it sounds like, for the month of March and maybe some of April, whatever that gap period is. But once you get your LLMSW, you won't need your LLBSW. And so you just won't pay that renewal fee and let that license lapse.
Would there be any reason to keep it though? Because is there more that you can do from a sign-off standpoint with the LBSW?
No, the master's supersedes anything at the bachelor's level.
Okay, thank you.
And that gives you a backup in case something happened and you maxed out the hours of your MSW license for whatever reason, you at least would have the bachelor's one to fall back on in a worst case scenario.
Even if it's lapsed?
Yeah, because you can renew a lapsed license.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, you could let a license lapse for 10 years. And absolutely, if you're not working under even your LLMSW, if you find yourself not working in a social work position for an X amount of time, don't renew that license. And you could come back 5 years later, and you'd, as long as you haven't maxed out those 6 renewals, you could still come back and have however many of those left.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Abby.
Hi, I have a question kind of around the hours and the supervision verification, specifically for those possible unicorns like myself who are coming from another state. So I'm an associate, so a limited license, essentially equivalent in another state. And I'm wondering if my work, the person I've been obtaining hours under right now is a licensed social worker, but they are in the state that I'm in right now, not in Michigan. Can the hours count, just not the supervision? Or is it everything now that cannot count towards my license as I move to Michigan?
So if you have a license already in a different state that you're transferring to Michigan, that process is called licensure through endorsement. And so you'll want to call Laura and ask about how that process should flow and what sort of supervision requirements should carry over. When licensure got updated 2 years ago, and this is something we're working on tweaking, something got added that required all supervision to be done by a Michigan social worker. That shouldn't be the case if you started a license in a different state. As long as you are following the rules of that state and it's the same license type that we have in Michigan, that should absolutely qualify for you here in Michigan.
Okay, I will reach out. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Erica.
Yeah, thank you. So this may be very specific to me, but in case there's anyone else on the call that has this question, I graduated with my MSW in 2021, but I entered into a job that does not have a licensed social worker and was trying to kind of figure out that professional development fund situation. And so I'm just curious to know how long, if any, do I have to be able to obtain my limited license before there's an issue with having to go back to school or something like that?
If you graduated from an accredited program, there's no time frame for when you have to start the licensure process. So at least as of now, you can go 25 years and you'd be fine to start it at that point. Now, the exam will probably be much harder, but there's no designation in terms of how quickly you have to apply for a license after graduation.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right. Okay, see a quick question from Rose and Ashley. How long will it take for a start to finish and applying for an LLBSW to full license? If you are working full time, it will take you 2 years to finish the licensure process, plus however much additional time it takes you to pass the exam. So assuming you finish all of your hours in full-time work, it'll take you 2 years. And then you can schedule your exam as soon as you're ready to. So if you've been studying while you have your limited license, you can take your exam. You could take it like the week after you get your hours complete if you wanted to. If you do need to take the exam multiple times, you have to wait 90 days in between. So I'd say, if you're ready to take your exam once your hours are complete, you should have your full license within 2.5 years, should you be working full time. And then I see Rose's questions about telehealth in Michigan. So generally the rule around telehealth in most states are you have to be licensed in the state your client is located in. So you as a therapist could be somewhere else, but if your client's in Michigan and you're licensed in Michigan, that's perfectly fine. That's true almost everywhere, is you have to be licensed in the state your client is located in. If your client goes on vacation, say to Florida, if they're gone for more than like a few days, you're not supposed to really see them for services. Now there's some continuity of care, ethical stuff that usually allows for a little bit of flexibility, but if they end up relocating to Florida, you would have to get licensed in Florida as well if you want to continue seeing that person. Partially, that's what the social work compact is about nationally. Should that get moved through state legislatures over the next couple of years, it would make it much easier for folks who have clients in multiple states to be able to practice without having to get licensed in every one of their states. In a nutshell, what a compact allows you to do as a social worker, if you're licensed in Michigan and Michigan is part of the compact, and you as a social worker want to belong to the compact, you are automatically licensed in every state that has passed the compact. You don't have to do anything else. As long as you maintain your Michigan license, you can practice with folks from any of those states. And so that's a real benefit. And you'll be seeing definitely some advocacy work over the next year or two around compact. Just today is when the draft language got released. So you'll hear about that a lot more over the next couple of years. Emily, did I already get your question?
No, you didn't.
Okay.
I just had a real quick question. So I'll be graduating in June of this year, and really I'm like looking at a timeline in terms of like opening up that portal account through Lara and getting the fingerprinting and everything like that. If I were to like activate my account through Lara, is there like a time frame from that point that I have to be fingerprinted or that my transcripts have to be submitted by, or is it just okay to submit it whenever I can?
No, they don't have a specific timeline like that. That's why I don't recommend generally setting up an account like more than a month before graduation. They're not going to likely get rid of an account if it's there for a certain amount of time, but it doesn't make sense if you know you're not going to be working right away or getting your fingerprints taken to have an account set up. So usually, 3 or 4 weeks out is a good time to do that, but nothing would likely happen. You're just more or less maybe wasting an application fee that you've provided. But as of now, I don't think that there's any time limit that Lara has said. Now that could change, that if there's a lot of people that have just created an account and not doing anything with them, they could change their own internal policy and say, after 5 years, somebody needs to create an account, a new account, if there's been no activity. But since this platform is new as of last year, nothing like that has come yet.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, good question. Okay, so we just have about 5 minutes left. So I want to get through a couple of the slides around the exam. And then if there are folks that have individual questions or other needs, I'll stick around for a few minutes after. And like I mentioned, I will have this recording available. It'll be on the NASW Michigan website as well as our YouTube channel if you want to check and listen back in on any pieces of it later. For those of you who are graduating in the spring, you get a free graduation cord from NASW. So if you're not a member, please join quickly too, because we're going to be sending those out probably in a couple of weeks. You would have gotten an email if you're a member last week that has the link from this, but you'll get a few more of those over the next couple of weeks. So just an extra little bonus to have some swag for graduation on that. But let's talk about the exam, at least in its current form and how it's operating right now. So the social work exam is a national exam that's owned and operated by the Association of Social Work Boards. You will take your exam on a computer at a Pearson Testing Center. There are lots of locations and times, and by lots of locations, I mean if you are Mount Pleasant South, there's a lot of locations. If you're in the northern part of the state, there are very few locations. So you may want to look at the Pearson, especially if you're in the northern part of the state, look at the Pearson VUE website. They can tell you where their locations are. Because for folks who live in Traverse City or Marquette, you may have to do a little bit more planning in terms of getting your scheduled date. The exam is 170 multiple choice questions. Only 150 count. 20 of them are being used to see if they want to continue on for future test purposes. So of the 150 count, you're going to have to get somewhere between 90 and 107 correct to pass. Every question is weighted based off of passing rate of that particular question. And so you don't know when you're taking your exam what your particular passing score is going to be. So while you're studying, you should be aiming for about an 80% pass rate regularly as you're going through prep questions. That will solidify you in that top range of the hard exams. And so if you're studying and you're regular hitting 60, 65, even maybe 70%, that's when you may want to consider taking a prep course or paying for some additional study materials. If you are a good test taker and you're already, when you're doing practice questions, doing really well, it may not make sense for you to spend hundreds of dollars on a prep material. And by the time you all are done with your BSW and MSW, you've done enough studying that you know generally when you are ready to take a test or not. Now, I know in my MSW program, there were very few well, actually, I don't think there was any standardized testing in my MSW program and very few quizzes or tests in general. Most of our projects are experience-based, group projects, writing, presentations. So this is definitely a different mindset that most of us in the social work field haven't had to be in quite a long time. Maybe it was the ACT or the SAT when we applied for undergrad. That might be the last time many of us took a standardized test like this, or maybe something in our undergrad program. So it's definitely something that you have to get in a different mindset of, that you haven't likely practiced this sort of preparation in a long time. You'll get 4 hours to take the examination. If you need accommodations, please, you'll need to let that know when you schedule your test so they can make sure that that is available for you. Maybe the best part and the only good part about the exam is you are notified immediately at the end whether you have passed or not. So you'll hit question 170 and you'll see the submit button in the corner, and there'll likely be a little bit or a lot of anxiety around hitting that button. You'll hit submit, and then it'll be, are you sure? And they'll hit, yeah, I'm sure. And then you'll get an 8-question evaluation, because we're social workers and we love some evaluation. And then it will either say congratulations or something like needs further study. So you're probably going to cry depending on how your exam goes. It's not a fun experience for anybody. If you don't pass, you can request a more detailed printout of your score, and we'll tell you the areas that you need particular studying in. The exam is from a generalist social work perspective. This is probably the hardest thing as a social worker to get in the mindset of. It's not what you would do at your job. It's not what you would do at your particular organization. Thinking about what would a social worker do anywhere in the United States or Canada with this particular information that is outlined in this question. And usually the questions are 2, maybe 3 sentences long. And so you have to almost take yourself out of your particular practice environment and put you into that big generalist social work bubble. And so that, thinking about right out of school, that's probably when you're the most generalist, because you've just learned all the theories, all the good stuff in your MSW and BSW program. Some of that you're going to have to revisit as you get closer to your testing date. The test itself is going to usually look at 2 types of questions, either direct questions and statements, or cases, which will give you a little couple of sentences. This is a social worker working with an 18-year-old client at a college service. What do you do? Blah, blah, blah. So you'll look for those cases. You always want to think about those sort of, where are they? What's the setting? Is this a hospital? Is this a school? What sort of outlier information did they put? Did they put the age of the client? If so, that's usually important, right? So what are those critical pieces that are in a question? And then you'll see words like, what should you do first? What is the best answer for this scenario? And there are usually two answers that are right in some fashion, right? And that's where the more you study and learn about how questions are written around this, it'll make it a little bit easier to think about these. Because usually going back to, you are a generalist social worker ready to do any type of social work in the United States or Canada. That's how you have to think about yourself, not as a mental health therapist, not as somebody who works in foster care, not somebody who works at a domestic violence shelter. You are the generalist social worker anywhere that you are in the United States. You can flag questions to come back to them, put an answer down just in case you run out of time, but you can flag questions and come back to them. You are now allowed to bring in snacks and water bottles. If you need to, they'll give you like a whiteboard and a marker to take notes on. But other than that, all of that will be on a computer. For most of you, it's almost all folks who are master's folks on this call. So you're going to have three types of questions: recall, application, and reasoning. Recall is just really descriptions and definitions. So this may be theory based. Which one of these is part of Erickson's design, whatever it might be. You're going to have some of those specific types of questions. Applications will look at rules or laws, and then reasoning will be your more judgment-based questions. If you're taking the bachelor's level exam, you won't have the reasoning questions on there. But you will see these three forms on the master's level, whether you're taking the clinical or the macro level exam. And the macro level exam is called advanced generalist. So I just skipped over some sample questions because I know we're out of time and I want to read a couple of the questions at the end. So just a couple exam day tips. Know where you're going. Your time starts whether you're there or not. So this was a good question that came up on one of the Facebook pages for social workers a couple of weeks ago, as we've been in these ice storms, and I think there's one coming today too. It looks like it out my window, but that's a fake window. But know where you're going. And if you know that there's going to be some inclement weather coming, contact your testing site and see if they have cancellation policies and what that looks like, especially if you're driving from a far distance to get to your site. The ASWB exam as of today is used in all 50 states. So you can take your exam anywhere in the United States. You don't have to take it in Michigan. You don't have to take it near where you live. If you're on vacation in Hawaii, you could take it in Hawaii. Please don't take it while you're on vacation in Hawaii. But in theory, you can take your exam wherever you want to or need to that is most convenient to you. You will need to make sure that your ID matches how you registered for the course. So if your name changes, something was spelled wrong, get that synced up before you go there. You don't want any reason for them to turn you around. And maybe my favorite piece of advice about this exam is if it doesn't say it, don't assume it. So what that means is you are going to read almost every question and want more information. Is there a magic box that I can click on that will give me 2 more sentences of presenting information? No, there's never any more information. So if you read a question, you're like, oh, I just had a client like that last week. No, you didn't. Because your client is going to have a different set of circumstances that you know more about than what is in this question. Only the information that they have provided in those 2 or 3 sentences should be what you use to answer that question. If you've had a real life example that sounds familiar, that might guide some of your thinking, but don't say that that's the exact same scenario. So don't assume anything else that is associated with maybe something else you've experienced in the real world. We'll only read what is on the question. Now, you all know at this point in your BSW and MSW programs, I'm sure none of you have ever procrastinated on an assignment. This is not really an exam you can wait until the very last second to do well on because it covers so much of social work. So you want to give yourself likely a couple of months to just slowly start getting through sample questions, get at least one person that is like your study buddy. So if you take a prep course, have them take that same prep course because you will pick up different informations in that setting. What works best for you? Is it going to be flashcards? Is it going to be a sample test? Is it going to be an app that you can use 10 minutes every day that will give you a different set of questions? What's going to be the best process for you? Some of you may want to go to an in-person prep course. Some may really prefer an online course. So what is going to be that style that's going to get you across the finish line for this test? use the apps that you can get on your whatever version of your phone is. Go into your app store, type in social work exam or ASWB clinical exam or whatever the version you're taking is. There are ones that range from free to about $15. Note that none of the apps that you will see on your store are written by ASWB. So 0 study materials that you will find in your app store will match what is on the exam immediately. ASWB does allow you to pay $75 for a sample test. Again, the questions won't be reiterated on your exam exactly. That's the closest you're going to get to exact questions that have been used at some point on the exam is through ASWB. But there are definitely some apps that are helpful. You know, use some of your textbooks, especially theory and diagnosis. Those are ones that you'll definitely get questions about. Have a copy of the Code of Ethics. Regardless of what sort of test you take, whether it's the bachelor's, the clinical, or the advanced generalist, you will have ethics questions. And in that folder that I put in the chat earlier, you will see that the ASWB content outlines are in there. So you can look at your specific exam and it will tell you the percentage of questions based off of each content area. And so as you're studying, I recommend just kind of highlighting through, okay, I know this thing, I don't need to study this particular area. I don't know this, I definitely need to read more about this, because you're going to find that you're going to be strong in some pieces of this already. Don't study the things you know, right? So study the things you don't know and really focus your energy there. Because at the end of the day, your objective is really just to pass. You just want to see that congratulations on the screen. It's not a competition with your other employees. The one thing you should be thinking about and asking about during your initial interview when you're applying for a job right out of school is there a salary increase when you get your full license? And is that in writing? Because that's definitely something that there should be a salary increase when you get your full license. We have licensure institutes. We usually do 2 a year. We just had one in February. Our next one will be in June. These are one-day courses. It comes with a really fabulous online learning platform that you also get a physical book for. But some of the schools of social work offer prep courses. There's a few online ones. You want to be a little bit careful and making sure you're finding reputable sources. So if your school has offered something, if you're seeing NASW put something out, those are usually pretty good to go through. But there are lots of folks out there that try to scam people into study materials. So making sure that you're listening to one of the larger social work entities, whether that's your school of social work that you know will send out trusted information. NASW, we always try to find the cheapest options possible for folks. Ours is only $45 for a full, or $49 for a full day course for any of our members. And that comes with a physical book and online learning platform. But there are courses that are several $100s if you want to take those. We also partner with a group called Pass It Pro. This is specifically for an older test taker. Her name is Adele, who created this course. She's a social worker in her 60s. Didn't pass her exam the first time, so she created a course that is more tailored to one-on-one kind of mentoring for folks. So if you have test anxiety, and maybe if you're a non-traditional student who haven't taken an exam in a really long time, you know, Pass It Pro has been a good option for folks there. This is my contact information, so I'll leave this up here for folks if you ever need to reach out to me. We also post sample questions on our Facebook page, so make sure that you check in there. Yeah, Karen, I saw your message. Oh, yeah, couldn't bring any water in August into the exam. Yeah, they just have changed their policy about letting people bring in water and snacks, which is good. All right, so I'm going to read through just a couple of questions for folks who need to leave. Thank you so much for hopping on. I really appreciate you all, and congratulations on those of you who are graduating in the spring. For those of you who are interested in joining NASW, if you're not already, if you go to socialworkers.org, you can find more information there. It does cost for students at $60 for a year, and that again gets you both into the state and into the national chapter. And when you join as a student, you get 3 years of discounts after graduation. So it slowly builds you up to the full MSW price. And while you're in those 3 years out of graduation, you pay the student price to attend any of our functions in the state of Michigan. So most of the online stuff that's free for like our conference in the spring, it's about 75% off if you are in that category. So we want to make sure that our students and our new professionals are still at events that can attend things, even if you don't need continuing education, because that networking is really, really critical. If you are, I see there's a couple of questions about Canada. So Canada